Hello, dear listeners. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to send a special hug to Andy Derricks from Kimberley, South Africa. She commented on our last video saying she loves our stories, as she can no longer read due to vision loss. Andy, please receive all our love. Our community is sending you many blessings, and I'm deeply moved to know that our stories have been helping so many people through difficult times. And what about you, dear listener? Leave your name and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Who knows? Maybe your name will be featured in the next video too. Now then, let's begin today's story. The first sound was a choked, watery sob, transmitted through the fragile connection of a phone call. Ethan? I'm so sorry to call you this late. Jane Miller's voice was a fractured whisper, stripped of its usual bright efficiency. I know you're my boss, but could you come get me? I don't know who else to call. On the other end of the line, in the silent luxury of his penthouse, Ethan Prescott didn't hesitate. There was no annoyance in his voice, no hint of professional distance. Only an immediate, calm authority. Where are you, Jane? I'm on my way. 15 minutes earlier, his world had been orderly. He had just dropped Jane on this very sidewalk, a rare personal gesture for his fiercely independent assistant. It was her boyfriend's birthday, and she had been practically vibrating with excitement, balancing a small, perfect-looking cake on her lap. Her eyes had been shining with anticipation. Ethan had let her leave work early, a small reward for the countless late nights she put in. The quiet, brilliant way she anticipated his needs and seamlessly covered for the mistakes of others. He'd even offered the ride, a simple kindness. Now, as his sleek black car pulled up to the same curb, the woman he found was a ghost of the one he'd left behind. The joy in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a raw, hollowed-out pain that was visceral even from a distance. She slid into the passenger seat without a word. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with unspoken misery. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The cake box was gone. Ethan pulled away from the curb, the car's engine a low, unobtrusive hum. He drove through the glittering city streets, respecting her silence, not daring to intrude on her private grief with clumsy questions. He was a man who solved problems, but this was a wound, and he had no idea how to begin to mend it. He was about to ask the perfunctory question, "Should I take you home?" when her voice, fragile as glass, broke the quiet. "He wouldn't open the door," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the blur of lights outside the window. I rang and rang. I knew he was home. I could hear the music. She took a shaky breath, the sound of her carefully constructed world shattering. I went around to the side window, the one in the kitchen. I just wanted to see. I saw her. There was a woman in the kitchen. She was wearing his shirt. The confession landed in the silent car with the force of a physical blow. It was a simple statement, but it held a universe of betrayal. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, a surge of protective, white-hot anger rising in him on her behalf. An anger at the faceless man who had so carelessly broken this bright, dedicated woman. He said nothing, just continued driving until he pulled up in front of her modest apartment building. He put the car in park, the engine idling softly. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was charged, intimate. He finally turned to look at her. His usually professional, detached expression was gone, replaced by a deep, genuine empathy. His voice, when he spoke, was low and firm, a stark contrast to the storm of anger he felt inside. It was more than a boss speaking to an assistant. It was a man speaking to a woman, a human being seeing another's pain. "You deserve better, Jane." The words hung in the air between them, a simple, powerful truth. In the quiet intimacy of the car, surrounded by the sleeping city, a line had been crossed. The space was no longer defined by their roles, but by a sudden, undeniable current of electricity, a shared moment of vulnerability that changed everything. 30 minutes later, Jane was cocooned in the hollow comfort of her small apartment. The television was on, the forced laughter of a sitcom, a pathetic attempt to drown out the sound of her own ragged sobs. A half-eaten tub of ice cream was melting on the cushion beside her, a cliché she was too heartbroken to resist. She was adrift in a sea of misery, the words "she was wearing his shirt" playing on a cruel, endless loop in her mind. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the sound jarring in the quiet room. She ignored it. It buzzed again. With a groan, she reached for it, expecting a pathetic, self-serving apology text from Drake. But the name on the screen made her heart skip a beat. Ethan Prescott. She hesitated, then answered, her voice thick and hoarse from crying. "Hello? Jane, it's Ethan." His voice was calm, steady, a stark contrast to her emotional chaos. "I know this is a terrible time," he began, his tone unusually hesitant. "But I need to ask you something." He paused, and the question, when it came, was strange and direct. "Do you trust me?" The question caught her completely off guard. Trust him? As a boss, absolutely. He was fair, demanding but brilliant. But this was different. This was personal. "Yes," she found herself whispering, unsure why. "Good," he said, a note of relief in his voice. "I have an unusual proposal. I want you to get away. Just for the weekend, with me." The invitation was so bizarre, so out of left field, that it momentarily silenced her grief. "What? Why?" "Because right now, this city is full of memories you don't need," he said simply. "And because I could use a break too." There was an urgency in his voice, a hint of his own burdens that suggested this wasn't just about her. It was a lifeline he was extending, perhaps to both of them. She was confused. She was heartbroken. But she was also adrift, with nothing to lose. The thought of staying in her apartment, drowning in memories of Drake, was unbearable. "Okay," she said, the single word a leap of faith into the unknown. "Pack a bag for a warm climate," was all he said before hanging up. An hour later, he was at her door. He didn't take her to the commercial airport. Instead, the sleek black car purred its way to a private hangar, where a small, elegant jet sat waiting on the tarmac, its engines humming softly. The sheer scale of his wealth, something she intellectually knew but had never truly witnessed, hit her with full force. During the flight, as the lights of the city receded below them, she finally found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Ethan, really? Why are you doing this?" He turned in his plush leather seat to face her, his expression serious. "Because, Jane," he said, his voice low and sincere. "For months, I've watched you work. You're brilliant, you're dedicated, and you're the only person in my entire orbit who doesn't seem to care that my last name is Prescott. You see the work, not the wealth." He paused, his gaze dropping for a moment. "And I know what betrayal feels like. I know how it can hollow you out. No one should have to go through that alone." The confession, so personal and unexpected, created a new, intimate tension between them. They landed in a small private airstrip as the sun was rising, the air warm and scented with salt and citrus. A car took them to a secluded villa nestled in the hills overlooking the sparkling blue of the Italian coast. It was his personal refuge, a place of breathtaking beauty and absolute privacy. The next day, in an attempt to clear her head, they went for a hike along a rugged coastal path. The beauty of the landscape was a soothing balm on her raw emotions. But as they navigated a steep, rocky section, her foot slipped. A sharp, searing pain shot up her leg, and she cried out, collapsing to the ground. Her ankle. Without a word of hesitation, Ethan was there. He knelt, his hands gently probing the rapidly swelling joint. "It's sprained," he diagnosed, his touch surprisingly gentle. Before she could protest or even process what was happening, he scooped her into his arms, her own arms instinctively wrapped around his neck for balance. She was suddenly, shockingly aware of his strength, of the solid wall of his chest, of the clean, masculine scent of his skin. He carried her as if she weighed nothing, his steps sure and steady on the uneven path. Back at the villa, he gently set her down on a sofa, his face a mask of concern. He worked with a quiet efficiency, retrieving ice, wrapping her ankle with a practiced, gentle touch that sent shivers up her spine. He was kneeling before her, his focus entirely on her injury, his brow furrowed with a concentration that was deeply, unexpectedly intimate. The proximity, the quiet care, the sheer physicality of him being so close, made the air thick and hard to breathe. The professional line between them had not just been crossed, it had been completely and utterly obliterated, and in its place was a raw, undeniable attraction that neither of them could possibly ignore. Confined to the villa with her ankle propped up on a mountain of plush cushions, Jane quickly grew restless. The breathtaking view from the terrace lost its charm, and the silence of the house became a heavy blanket. Ethan, meanwhile, was a man possessed. He was tethered to his laptop, pacing the length of the living room, his face a mask of intense stress. He was on a series of video calls, his voice sharp and demanding. The words, Project Omega, echoed through the villa. Jane gathered from the snippets of conversation that it was the biggest, most important software launch in his company's history. A project that would either solidify his legacy or shatter his reputation. "I'm going out of my mind with boredom," she finally said during a break in his calls. "Is there anything I can read?" "The library is upstairs," he said, his eyes still glued to his screen, his mind clearly a million miles away. "I can't get up the stairs, remember?" she replied, a hint of playful exasperation in her voice. She pointed to his laptop. "What about those? The reports for Project Omega. Let me have a look. Maybe I can find a typo." He glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his tired eyes. It was an absurd request. She was his administrative assistant. The documents were filled with complex algorithms, predictive models, and dense lines of code that were Greek to most people. But he was distracted, and she was clearly desperate for a distraction. "Fine," he said, placing the laptop on the ottoman in front of her. "Knock yourself out. Just don't delete anything." She opened the first file, a projection analysis for user load and server scalability. At first she was just skimming, but then her brow furrowed. Something felt off, and she saw a pattern, a tiny, elegant, and catastrophic flaw in the math. A chill ran down her spine. It wasn't a typo. It was a fundamental error in the core assumption of the scaling algorithm. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but urgent. He was on another call and he waved a dismissive hand at her. "Ethan," she said again, her voice sharper this time, cutting through his conversation. He ended the call abruptly, an annoyed look on his face. "What is it, Jane? I'm in the middle of a crisis." "You're about to be in a much bigger one," she said, her finger tapping the screen. "There's a mistake here. In the scalability projection." She pointed to a specific line of code. "This calculation, it assumes a linear growth in data processing, but the architecture you're using will create an exponential load. It will work for the first few hours, but once you hit critical mass..." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with the gravity of her discovery. "If you launch as is, the entire system will crash. A total, catastrophic failure in less than 24 hours. The color drained from Ethan's face. He stared at her, then at the screen, then back at her. He snatched the laptop, his own eyes flying across the data. He saw what she was pointing to, and a look of dawning horror spread across his features. His entire team of world-class six-figure salaried engineers had missed it. A multi-million-dollar, reputation-defining project was on the verge of imploding. He immediately convened an emergency video conference with his lead engineers. He shared his screen, his voice tight and controlled, and pointed to the flaw she had identified. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a frantic flurry of confirmations. She was right. After the call ended, Ethan stood in the silent living room, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. He looked at Jane, who was watching him with a nervous expression. He was no longer looking at his assistant. He was looking at a hidden genius, a secret weapon he never knew he had. He walked over and knelt in front of her, his expression a mixture of awe and utter disbelief. "How, Jane?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How in the world did you know that?" The question hung in the quiet, sun-drenched room. "How did you know?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea for understanding from a man whose entire world had just been tilted on its axis. Jane looked down at her hands, a faint flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. The secret she had guarded for so long, the ghost of the life she had been forced to abandon, was about to be exorcised. "I wasn't always an administrative assistant," she began, her voice soft. "I was 3 years into a software engineering degree at Stanford." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. Stanford's engineering program was legendary, notoriously difficult to get into and even harder to complete. "What happened?" he asked gently, sensing the story was a painful one. "My aunt," Jane whispered, a familiar ache settling in her chest. "She raised me after my parents died. She was my whole world. She got sick. Really sick. The treatments were expensive and the insurance didn't cover everything. I dropped out of school to work full-time to help pay the bills, to be with her. She stared out at the sparkling sea, the memory still raw. She passed away 2 years ago. But the medical debt, it was a mountain. I was drowning in it. Going back to school was impossible. The job at your company was the best I could get without a degree. It was steady. It paid the bills." She finally looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just never stopped loving it. The logic, the problem solving. I read articles. I do online tutorials. I try to keep up. It's the one part of that old life I couldn't let go of." Ethan listened, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. He was seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the brilliant mind, the fierce loyalty, the quiet sacrifices she had made. He saw the incredible, untapped potential that had been buried under a mountain of bad luck and personal tragedy. A deep, profound sense of injustice stirred within him. He stood up and began to pace the room, a restless energy radiating from him. He stopped, his back to her, and looked out at the horizon. "I'm going to pay off your debts," he said, his voice firm, decisive. "All of them, and I'm going to fund the remainder of your degree, whatever it costs." Jane's heart leaped, but she immediately shook her head. "Ethan, no, I can't let you do that. It's too much, it's charity." He turned to face her, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. "Then don't consider it charity," he said, walking back toward her. "Consider it an investment." He knelt in front of her again, his gaze intense and sincere. "Prescott Tech is making a strategic investment in its single most valuable asset. You. You saved Project Omega. You did something my entire team couldn't. You don't belong behind a desk scheduling my meetings, Jane. You belong in our lab, building the future." After a few hours, he opened the folder and took out a sheet of paper. He placed it on her lap. "This is a contract," he said, his eyes twinkling. "But not the kind you're thinking of. It's an advance on your future employment. It outlines a full scholarship, a debt settlement, and a senior engineering position at Prescott Tech, waiting for you the day you graduate." She stared at the folder, speechless. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was all there, in black and white. A future she thought had been stolen from her, handed back to her not as a gift, but as something she had earned. He wasn't saving her. He was recognizing her. He was betting on her. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Say you'll accept," he said softly. "Say you'll let me invest in you." How could she possibly refuse? It was more than money. It was a career. It was respect. It was a testament of his belief in her. It was, she realized with a jolt, that had nothing to do with gratitude, the most profoundly romantic gesture she had ever known. The final day in Italy was bathed in a golden, dreamlike light. The agreement had been made, the contract signed. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. He was no longer just her boss, and she was no longer just his assistant. The professional hierarchy had dissolved, replaced by a partnership built on mutual respect and a simmering, unspoken attraction. The air between them was thick with it. Every shared glance held a new weight. Every casual touch lingered a moment too long. The gratitude in her heart had mingled with a deep, growing admiration, and it was all becoming tangled up in a feeling she was too afraid to name. He, in turn, looked at her with an open admiration that was completely new, his gaze often softening when he thought she wasn't looking. Their last evening, he arranged for a simple dinner to be served on the villa's main terrace. A small table was set for two, overlooking the sea as the sun began its slow, spectacular descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. They didn't talk about work. They didn't talk about her ex-boyfriend. They talked about everything else. He told her about his childhood, about the immense pressure of being a Prescott, and his secret dream of one day sailing around the world. She told him about her passion for building things, for creating order out of chaos, and her fear of not living up to the potential he saw in her. The conversation was easy, deep, and profoundly intimate. The connection between them was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was a powerful, undeniable tide, pulling them closer with every shared story, every shared laugh. As darkness settled, leaving them in the soft glow of a few flickering candles, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Jane," Ethan said, his voice a low, serious murmur that was different from his usual confident tone. He reached across the small table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, firm, and sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. "I know your heart is still healing," he began, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "And the last thing I want to do is rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I wouldn't be honest if I didn't tell you what's been happening with me." He took a breath, his gaze holding hers, full of a sincerity that made her insides tremble. "From the first day you walked into my office, I saw something special. A light, a brilliance you tried to hide. I told myself it was just professional admiration." He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I was lying to myself. This weekend, seeing your strength, your resilience, your genius, it just confirmed what my heart has known for a long time." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm falling for you, Jane. I think I have been for a very long time." His confession was simple, direct, and utterly breathtaking. This time, when he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't pull away. She didn't even hesitate. She met him halfway. The kiss was everything they had been repressing for months. It was tender with unspoken admiration, passionate with pent-up longing, and deeply comforting with a sense of rightness, of coming home. It was a kiss that tasted of expensive wine, salt air, and the promise of a new beginning. When it finally ended, they didn't pull apart. They rested their foreheads together, their eyes closed, their breaths mingling in the warm Italian night. The professional line had been crossed. The personal boundary had been erased. They were finally just a man and a woman who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives. But as the reality of their situation began to creep back in, a single, terrifying question hung in the air between them. What happens Monday morning when the CEO and his former assistant, the company's newest engineering prodigy, walk back into the real world? The return to reality was less of a crash and more of a strange, thrilling recalibration. The office buzzed with the news. Jane Miller, the quiet, efficient administrative assistant, was not only back in school finishing her engineering degree on a full company scholarship, but she was also working part-time as a junior consultant on the now flawless Project Omega. Her relationship with Ethan was their secret, a fragile, beautiful thing they nurtured in quiet moments. Shared smiles across a crowded conference room, late nights working side by side in his office that ended with soft, stolen kisses, weekends spent far from the corporate world. Jane was happier than she had ever been. She was intellectually stimulated, her future was bright, and she was falling deeper in love with a man who saw and valued every part of her. A few weeks into her new life, an email landed in her university inbox. It was from a man named Ronald Sterling, identifying himself as an angel investor and head of Sterling Innovations. Dear Ms. Miller, the email read, I have been following the recent buzz around Prescott Tech's Project Omega. Through my sources, I've learned of the pivotal role a brilliant young mind played in saving it from disaster. I make it my business to identify and nurture emerging talent. I would be honored if you would join me for lunch to discuss your future. Jane's heart swelled with pride. Someone outside of Ethan's circle had recognized her contribution. It was validation. Flattered and seeing no harm in it, she accepted the invitation. She didn't know that Ronald Sterling wasn't just an investor. He was Ethan's most ruthless rival, a man known for corporate espionage and poaching top talent. They met at a chic minimalist restaurant downtown. Ronald was charming, impeccably dressed, and praised her work with a sincerity that felt intoxicating. He listened intently as she spoke about her passion for engineering. You have a rare gift, Jane, he said, leaning forward. Which is why I'm concerned. I've seen this story before. A brilliant junior saves the day, and the man at the top takes all the credit. That's not what's happening, Jane said quickly, a defensive edge to her voice. Ethan has been incredibly supportive. Supportive? Ronald chuckled, a smooth, condescending sound. He's paying your tuition? Jane, you saved him from a $100 million catastrophe. A scholarship isn't an investment, it's a muzzle. It's the cheapest possible way to keep you quiet and loyal while he accepts the awards and the accolades for your discovery. He shook his head, a look of faux pity on his face. You deserve better. You deserve to be the name on the project, not a footnote in his success story. Jane felt a prickle of unease. She defended Ethan, insisting he wasn't like that. But Ronald's words were insidious, a drop of poison in the well of her newfound happiness. The seed of doubt had been planted. She didn't know that, sitting at a table across the restaurant, partly obscured by a large plant, was Mark, Ethan's trusted chief of staff. He watched the animated conversation between Jane and his boss's arch-nemesis. With a small, triumphant smile, he discreetly raised his phone, angled it, and snapped a picture. The photo was a masterpiece of misinterpretation. It captured a moment where Jane was leaning forward, listening intently, and Ronald was smiling, his hand resting on the table near hers. It looked intimate, conspiratorial. Mark immediately sent the photo to Ethan, adding a single devastating line of text. I think we have a problem. Your protege is having a very friendly lunch with Ronald Sterling. The image on Ethan's phone screen was a punch to the gut. Jane, Ronald Sterling, leaning in close, smiling. The context didn't matter. The visual was a betrayal in itself. All his old demons, the ghosts of past betrayals by people who only wanted his name or his money, rose up with a vengeance. The trust he had so carefully, so tentatively placed in her felt like it was shattering. And behind it all was the insidious whisper of Mark's feigned concern. When Jane walked back into the Prescott Tech offices later that afternoon, her mind still wrestling with the doubts Ronald had planted, she found Ethan waiting for her. He wasn't in his office. He was standing in the middle of the open-plan workspace, his posture rigid, his face a cold, unreadable mask. My office. Now, he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. It was the voice of her CEO, not the man who had kissed her under the Italian stars. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She followed him into the glass-walled office, and he shut the door behind them, the quiet click echoing the sudden closing of his heart. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. What he did was infinitely worse. He was cold, clinical, and dripping with a disappointment that felt like acid. He held up his phone, displaying the picture Mark had sent. Explain this, Jane. She stared at the photo, her mind struggling to process the implication. That's... I had lunch with an investor. Ronald Sterling. He reached out to me. He said he was impressed with my work. Your work? Ethan interrupted, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping his lips. Or my work? Did he want to talk about your future, Jane? Is that what this was about? He was parroting the poison Mark had been feeding him for weeks. He was just offering advice, she stammered, feeling defensive, cornered. Advice? Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Or an offer. Did he offer you more, Jane? A bigger check? A title? Is that what this is? After everything I've done for you, after I gave you a future, you were sitting there smiling, selling yourself to my biggest rival. The accusation, so baseless and cruel, struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't just questioning her loyalty. He was questioning her very character. He was reducing their entire relationship, his investment in her, to a simple transaction, the very thing Ronald had accused him of. Sell myself? She whispered, her voice trembling. The hurt was so profound it felt like a physical wound. You think, after everything, that I'm for sale? Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were hot, angry tears of betrayal. The man she loved, the man she thought finally saw her for who she was looking at her and seeing a commodity. You know what? She said, her voice suddenly gaining a cold, hard strength born of pure heartbreak. Ronald was right about you. The words were a desperate last-ditch effort to make him see, to make him understand how deeply he was wounding her. But to Ethan, blinded by his own pain and fear, it sounded like a confession. So there was an offer, he said, his face hardening into stone. That was it, the final, unforgivable blow. If that's what you think of me, she said, her voice now eerily calm, if you think I could do that, then you never knew me at all. With a steady hand, she reached up and unclipped the Prescott Tech ID badge from her collar. She walked to his massive, empty desk and placed it gently on the polished surface. The small piece of plastic seemed to mock them with its officialdom. I quit, she said, the words quiet, but absolute. She turned and walked out of the office, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look back. She left him standing alone in his glass fortress, with her badge on his desk like a tombstone for the trust he had just killed. The silence he was left with was no longer just quiet. It was the deafening sound of his own heart breaking. The days that followed were a silent, gray hell for Ethan. The office felt hollow, his work meaningless. He would walk past Jane's empty desk a dozen times a day, a fresh wave of regret washing over him each time. He tried calling her, his pride warring with a desperate need to hear her voice, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He had built a wall of suspicion and accusation, and now he was trapped behind it, completely alone. His focus on work shattered. Project Omega, once his singular passion, now felt like a monument to his failure. He was distracted, irritable, and his performance suffered. Mark, his ever-present chief of staff, was a model of feigned sympathy. Don't worry, Ethan, he'd say, placing a hand on his shoulder. She wasn't who you thought she was. It's better you found out now. Each word of comfort was another twist of the knife. A week after Jane left, a real crisis hit. A senior engineer rushed into Ethan's office, his face pale. There's a problem with the Omega source code, the engineer said, his voice tight with panic. A critical data file has been corrupted. It's the final build for the launch next week. We have backups, but we've lost days of optimization work. It's a major setback. A cold dread trickled down Ethan's spine. A corrupted file. It was too specific, too targeted to be a random glitch. It felt like sabotage. His first, gut-wrenching thought was a flash of Jane's face, immediately followed by a wave of self-loathing. No, he couldn't let his mind go there again. I want a full diagnostic, Ethan commanded, his voice sharp, the CEO in him taking over. "I want to know who accessed that file, from where and when. Get our cybersecurity team on it, now." He spent the next few hours pacing his office like a caged animal, while his top security analysts dug through server logs and access protocols. The initial report came back, and it made his blood run cold. The file corruption wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate deletion, followed by an unauthorized data transfer to an external, encrypted server. The transfer had occurred just minutes after his confrontation with Jane. It was a setup. The timing was too perfect. Someone wanted it to look like she had stormed out, and, in an act of revenge, sabotaged the project on her way out the door. "Trace the transfer," Ethan ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. "I don't care what it takes. Find out where that data went." The cybersecurity team worked through the night, peeling back layers of encryption and rerouted IP addresses. The next morning, the head of the team walked into Ethan's office and closed the door. "We found it," he said, his expression grim. "The digital trail was expertly hidden, but we traced the final destination." He slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen was the address of the server that had received the stolen data. It wasn't a random hacker's server. It belonged to Sterling Innovations. Ethan felt a surge of white-hot rage. Ronald. But how? He needed an inside man. "Who initiated the transfer?" Ethan asked, his voice a low growl. "Which terminal did it come from?" "That's the strange part," the analyst said. "The access credentials used were yours, Ethan. But the transfer wasn't initiated from your terminal. It was routed through a different workstation on the executive floor." He pulled up another screen. "Workstation 7B. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He knew exactly who sat at Workstation 7B. He found Mark in the break room, pouring a cup of coffee, a smug, satisfied look on his face. Ethan walked up to him, his movements unnervingly calm. "Mark," he said, his voice soft. "Ethan, just the man. I was thinking we should—" "It was you," Ethan interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Mark froze, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" "The file. The transfer to Sterling's server. It came from your workstation." The color drained from Mark's face. He was caught. Ensnarled in a digital trap he thought was foolproof. He started to stammer, to deny, but the look in Ethan's eyes, a look of cold, absolute fury, silenced him. Cornered and exposed, Mark confessed everything. He had been on Ronald's payroll for months, feeding him information, waiting for the right moment to sabotage Project Omega from the inside. Jane discovering the original flaw had been an unforeseen complication. She had become a threat. The plan to frame her was Ronald's idea, a brilliant, cruel way to neutralize the threat she posed, shatter Ethan's morale, and clear the path for Sterling Innovations to dominate the market. The truth was a physical blow. It knocked the air from Ethan's lungs. He hadn't just been wrong about Jane. He had been a pawn. He had been manipulated into becoming the weapon used against the one person he loved, accusing her of the very betrayal that was being perpetrated by the man standing right next to him. He had hurt her. He had broken her trust. And he had done it all while she was being set up as the scapegoat for a crime she had in fact prevented. The depth of his failure was absolute. And now, she was gone. Months passed. For Ethan, they were a blur of damage control, legal battles, and a deep, gnawing emptiness. He fired Mark, sued Ronald for corporate espionage, and managed to launch Project Omega successfully. But the victory felt hollow. Every accolade, every glowing press mention, was a bitter reminder of the woman who should have been by his side, sharing the triumph. He had her scholarship money transferred to an untouchable trust, but he knew it was a hollow gesture. He had broken something far more valuable than a contract. For Jane, those same months were a period of painful, transformative rebirth. The first few weeks after she left were a haze of heartbreak and disillusionment. She had retreated to her small apartment, The silence, a constant reminder of her loss. The pain of Ethan's accusation was a sharper wound than Drake's infidelity had ever been. Drake had betrayed her love. Ethan had betrayed her very essence. But Jane Miller was not a victim. She was a builder. She was a problem solver. One morning, staring at her own tear-streaked reflection in the mirror, she remembered the feeling of utter helplessness after her breakup with Drake, the confusion and the loss of self-worth. She thought about the countless other women who must feel that same way after a heartbreak, a job loss, or any of life's brutal setbacks. An idea sparked. A solution to a problem. She refused to be defeated. Using the small savings she had painstakingly accumulated and a modest personal loan from a credit union, adamantly refusing to touch the trust Ethan had set up, she got to work. She wasn't just an engineer. She was a woman who understood the intricate architecture of a broken heart. She poured all her pain, her brilliance, and her empathy into a new project. It wasn't a massive corporate undertaking. It was something deeply personal. She spent her days in coffee shops, coding furiously, and her nights sketching out user interfaces. She interviewed therapists, nutritionists, and fitness coaches. The result was Bloom. It wasn't just another wellness app. It was a holistic, empathetic companion for women navigating difficult life transitions. It combined guided meditations for healing, personalized fitness plans to rebuild strength, nutritional advice for self-care, and, most importantly, a secure, anonymous community forum where women could share their stories and support one another. The interface was intuitive, the design was beautiful, and the core philosophy was one of compassion, not competition. She launched it quietly, with no marketing budget, relying only on word of mouth. And it exploded. It started as a trickle, then became a flood. Women shared it in private groups, texted it to friends going through a divorce, recommended it to daughters struggling with self-esteem. The app's authenticity resonated. The stories in the community forum were raw, real, and powerful. Bloom wasn't just an app. It was a movement. Within 3 months, it had gone viral. Tech blogs started writing about the mysterious new app that was dominating the charts. Investors started calling. Jane Miller, the former administrative assistant who had disappeared from the tech world, was suddenly the most talked about new CEO in the industry. She had taken her deepest pain and engineered it into her greatest success. One crisp autumn morning, an official embossed envelope arrived at her small, bustling office. She opened it, her heart giving a nervous flutter. It was an invitation. She had been nominated for the Innovator of the Year award at the National Technology Leadership Summit, the most prestigious awards ceremony in the country. Her app, Bloom, was a contender. And as she scanned the list of other nominees, her breath caught in her throat. The front-runner for the grand prize, the Award for Technological Excellence, was, of course, Prescott Tech, for the groundbreaking success of Project Omega. The stage was set. Their paths were inevitably about to cross again. The night of the award ceremony was a glittering spectacle of power and innovation. The grand ballroom was filled with the titans of the tech industry, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. But tonight, Jane Miller was not an outsider. She was not a waitress or an assistant. She was a contender. She moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that was entirely new. Her dress was simple but elegant, her hair styled in soft waves. She was no longer the girl who needed rescuing. She was a woman who had built her own kingdom. She exuded a calm, centered strength that turned heads more than any flashy jewelry could. Then she saw him. He was across the room, surrounded by a circle of industry heavyweights, but he seemed distant, his smile strained. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to fall away. The noise, the music, the people, it all faded into a dull hum. In his eyes, she saw a cocktail of emotions so potent it made her breath catch. Regret, admiration, and a deep, aching longing. The crowd around him seemed to part, and he began walking toward her. Each step he took felt deliberate, momentous. The inevitable reunion was happening. He stopped a few feet in front of her, a respectful distance. He looked older, more tired than she remembered, the weight of the past few months etched into the lines around his eyes. "Jane," he said, his voice low, almost rough. "You look incredible." "So do you, Ethan," she replied, her voice cooler and more steady than she felt. "Congratulations on the success of Project Omega." "It should have been your success too," he said immediately, the regret in his voice raw and undisguised. He shook his head, as if words were failing him. "I'm sorry, Jane. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I need you to hear it." The sincerity in his eyes was a sharp pang in her chest. She saw the man she had fallen in love with, not the cold accuser from that terrible day. "I'm going to make it right," he continued, his gaze intense. "Tonight." Before she could ask what he meant, a booming voice from the stage announced the final, most prestigious award of the evening. And now, for the Award for Technological Excellence, an award recognizing the single most impactful innovation of the year. The nominees are... A drum roll began. The screen behind the stage flashed with logos. Bloom was there, and so was Project Omega. And the winner is... The presenter opened the envelope. Prescott Tech for Project Omega. A wave of applause swept through the ballroom. Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, looking at Jane, his expression pained. A colleague patted him on the back, urging him toward the stage. With a final, meaningful look at her, he turned and walked toward the podium, the golden trophy waiting for him. He stepped up to the microphone, the heavy award in his hands. The spotlight was on him. The world was watching. He looked out at the vast, expectant crowd, his gaze sweeping over the faces until it found hers and held it. He took a deep breath, ready to begin the speech that would define his victory. The spotlight was blinding, the applause a deafening roar in Ethan's ears. He stood at the podium, the heavy, cold weight of the trophy in his hands, a stark contrast to the burning turmoil in his chest. This was the pinnacle of his professional life, the culmination of years of work, the ultimate validation, and it felt completely, utterly hollow. He looked out at the sea of faces, but the only person he truly saw was Jane. She was standing near the back of the room, her expression a mixture of pride, pain, and guarded curiosity. This moment, he realized, wasn't about his victory. It was about his redemption. He cleared his throat, and the room fell into a hushed, expectant silence. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady, amplified throughout the grand ballroom. "Thank you to the committee, to my incredible team, and to everyone who believed in Project Omega." He paused, his gaze fixed on Jane. "But I cannot accept this award." A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. People shifted in their seats, whispering to their neighbors. On the stage, the presenters exchanged confused glances. Ethan ignored them. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping but gaining an intensity that commanded the attention of every person in the room. "A few months ago," he continued, "Project Omega was on the verge of a catastrophic failure. A flaw buried deep in its code, a mistake worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was missed by my entire team of senior engineers. The project, and my company's reputation, was about to be destroyed." He let the confession hang in the air, the admission of fallibility, stunning the corporate world. It wasn't saved by a team of experts or a high-priced consultant. It was saved by one person, a brilliant, intuitive engineer who saw what no one else could. He took a deep breath, the hardest part of his confession yet to come. This same person was then targeted in a vicious act of corporate espionage, orchestrated by my rival, Ronald Sterling, and carried out by my own chief of staff, Markinson Bell. He named them, publicly. The gasps in the room were audible now. He was not just admitting a weakness, he was declaring war. They conspired to sabotage this project and to frame this brilliant young woman as a traitor. "And I," he said, his voice cracking with a raw, self-recriminating pain. "In my own fear and arrogance, blinded by my own past, I fell for it. I accused an innocent person, the very person who had saved me, of the worst kind of betrayal." His eyes, glistening under the hot stage lights, found Jane's again. The entire audience seemed to turn with him, their gaze following his. "The success of Project Omega, the reason I am standing on this stage tonight, is due to one person and one person alone," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "The true genius behind this project is not me. The true innovator is not me." He lifted the heavy golden trophy, the symbol of his supposed triumph. "This award," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "belongs to its rightful owner. It belongs to Jane Miller." He didn't wait for the applause or the reaction. He stepped down from the podium, leaving a stunned and silent audience in his wake, and began to walk through the crowd. He walked with a singular purpose, his eyes never leaving her, the heavy trophy extended in his hands like an offering. The cameras, the reporters, the entire tech world, they all turned to focus on her. He was not just giving her an award. He was giving her the credit, the truth, and his public, unconditional apology. He stopped in front of her, the space between them electric, the golden trophy a bridge between his world of regret and her world of newfound strength. For a heart-stopping moment, Jane was frozen, the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes on her. The golden trophy, offered like a penitent's plea, gleamed under the ballroom lights. Her mind was a whirlwind of shock, vindication, and a pain so deep she had forgotten its shape. Then her instincts took over. With a quiet grace that belied the storm inside her, she reached out and took the award from his hands. Her fingers brushed against his, and a jolt of the old, familiar electricity passed between them. She gave a small, dignified nod to the stunned audience, a silent acceptance not of his apology, but of the truth he had finally spoken. The ballroom erupted into a thunderous, sustained applause, this time entirely for her. In the ensuing chaos, as people rose to their feet, Ethan gently took her elbow. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. He guided her away from the flashing cameras and the clamoring reporters, leading her through a side door and into the quiet, dimly lit labyrinth of the backstage area. They found themselves alone in a small, empty dressing room, the roar of the crowd a distant, muffled sound. The silence between them was vast, filled with months of pain, misunderstanding, and unspoken longing. She placed the heavy award on a nearby table, the metallic clink unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Why?" she asked, her voice a trembling whisper. "Why would you do that, Ethan? You could have destroyed your own reputation." "Because my reputation is worthless if it's built on a lie," he answered immediately, his voice raw with an honesty that stripped him bare. "Because the truth matters. You matter." He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "I was wrong, Jane. So profoundly, devastatingly wrong. I let my own past, my own fears, twist me into a person I don't recognize. I doubted you, the one person in my life who has been nothing but loyal and true. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." The apology was simple, absolute, and completely without excuse. It was everything she needed to hear. "I love you," he said, the words quiet but carrying the weight of his entire soul. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't making a demand. It was a confession, pure and simple. "I know I have no right to say that to you now. I know I might be too late. But I couldn't live another day without you knowing it, without you knowing the truth of what's in my heart." He stood before her, stripped of his power, his pride, his defenses. He was just a man, flawed and broken, who had risked everything for a single chance to tell her the truth. The anger and hurt that had been her constant companions for months began to dissolve, washed away by the raw sincerity in his eyes. He had wounded her, yes, but he had also just publicly sacrificed his own victory for her honor. She thought of the lonely nights, the struggle to build her app, the fire that had been forged in the pain he had caused. But she also thought of the man who had seen her brilliance when no one else did, the man who had carried her when she fell, the man who had believed in her enough to invest in her future. Could she forgive him? Could she trust him again? The answer, she realized with a sudden, heart-stopping clarity, had been there all along. Tears welled in Jane's eyes, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of pain or anger. They were tears of a slow, complicated, and overwhelming relief. "I love you too, Ethan," she admitted, the words finally escaping after being held captive for so long. Her voice was a soft, trembling whisper, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a thunderclap. "I think a part of me never stopped." The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated relief. It was as if a physical, crushing weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He took a step closer, his hands coming up as if to touch her, but he stopped himself, a new respect and hesitation in his posture. "But," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength, "I can't go back. I'm not your assistant anymore, Ethan. I'm not your protege. I've spent these last few months building my own path. I have to see where it leads." He nodded immediately, his expression full of a deep, painful understanding. "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I would never ask you to. You've built something incredible, Jane. On your own. You're a CEO, a founder. You're my equal in every way." The acknowledgement, the validation of her own success coming from him, was more powerful than any apology. "That's why," he said, a new, nervous energy entering his voice, "I'm not here to offer you your old job back. I'm here to offer you a merger." The word hung in the air, completely unexpected. "A merger?" she repeated, confused. "Not in the traditional sense," he clarified quickly. "I don't want to absorb Bloom. I want to empower it. I'm proposing a partnership. Prescott Tech will acquire a minority stake in your company, providing the capital and infrastructure to scale Bloom globally, overnight. But you," he said, pointing at her, his eyes blazing with an intensity she hadn't seen since Italy, "remain the CEO. You retain full creative control. You run your company. You call the shots." He took a final step, closing the distance between them. He gently took her hands in his touch sending a familiar welcome warmth through her. "I don't want to save you, Jane," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I don't want to be your boss. I want to build an empire with you, as partners. In business, and if you'll have me, in life." She stared at him, speechless. It was the most audacious, respectful, and breathtaking proposal she could have ever imagined. He wasn't trying to put her back in a box, even a gilded one. He was offering her a bigger stage, a louder microphone, and his unwavering support to help her amplify her own voice. He didn't want to own her success. He wanted to champion it. It was everything she had ever wanted, to be seen, to be valued, to be respected as an equal. To have a partner who didn't just love her, but who fundamentally believed in her. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "Mr. Prescott," she said, a playful, familiar light returning to her eyes. "I believe we have a deal." 6 months later, the tech world was still buzzing. The merger of Prescott Tech and Bloom was the story of the year, a masterclass in modern partnership. It wasn't a hostile takeover or a quiet absorption. It was a true collaboration. With the full force of Prescott Tech's resources behind it, Bloom expanded globally at an explosive rate, helping millions of women and becoming a household name. And at the helm of it all were the industry's new power couple, Ethan Prescott and Jane Miller. Jane's new office was a testament to her journey. It was a spacious, light-filled corner office on the top floor of the newly christened Bloom Tower, a building Ethan had insisted her company have to itself. The walls were covered not with corporate art, but with her own charcoal sketches and motivational prints. It was a space that was both professional and deeply personal, a reflection of the company she had built. The door opened without a knock, a familiar, comfortable habit. Ethan walked in, a slight smile on his face, holding 2 coffee mugs. He placed one on her desk, black, just how she liked it. It was a small ritual they had, a quiet nod to the old days that now felt a lifetime away. "You look like you're plotting world domination," he said, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Just the wellness sector," she replied with a grin, not looking up from the tablet she was sketching on. "For now." Their dynamic was a beautiful, intricate dance. They were partners in every sense of the word. In the boardroom, they were a formidable team, challenging each other, pushing each other to be better, their combined vision driving both companies to new heights. In private, they were just Ethan and Jane, leaving the weight of their empires at the door, finding solace and laughter in the quiet moments. He watched her for a moment, a look of profound admiration on his face. "You have a meeting," he said finally. She looked up, confused. "I don't. My calendar is clear for the next hour." "It's a new meeting," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "A top priority investment proposal, and the investors are waiting." Intrigued, she followed him out of her office. He didn't lead her to a conference room. Instead, he led her to the private elevator, taking it all the way to the roof. When the doors opened, she gasped. The rooftop terrace, which was usually a stark, empty space, had been completely transformed. Strings of fairy lights were woven through the trellises. Hundreds of candles flickered in the twilight, and the air was filled with the soft scent of roses and jasmine. In the center of it all, a single table was set for 2. There was no one else there. "Ethan, what is all this?" she asked, laughing, completely taken by surprise. He took her hand, his expression turning serious, his eyes full of a deep, nervous sincerity. "It's a proposal," he said, his voice soft. "The most important one of my life." The city lights glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars, but Jane only had eyes for Ethan. The man who had once been her intimidating boss, then her unexpected savior, and finally her fierce champion, now stood before her, his heart completely bare. "Jane Miller," he began, his voice a low, earnest murmur against the quiet hum of the city. He didn't let go of her hand. "I've offered you a job. I've offered you an investment. I've offered you a merger." A soft smile played on her lips as she remembered the whirlwind of their journey. "I gave you a scholarship and a title," he continued, a flicker of the old pain in his eyes. "I gave you a thoughtless, stupid accusation and a world of doubt when you deserved nothing but my absolute trust. But you, in return, you gave me your forgiveness. You taught me how to trust again. You became my partner in every sense of the word. And you made my world whole." He took a deep breath, his gaze so full of love it made her heart ache. Then, to her utter astonishment, he slowly got down on one knee. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of dark silk, was a ring. It wasn't a massive, ostentatious diamond meant to signal wealth. It was an elegant, custom-designed piece, a band of platinum that twisted and flowed like a line of code, culminating in a single brilliant, clear diamond. It was a perfect fusion of art and logic. It was them. "So now," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up at her, "I want to offer you one last contract. The final one. It has no exit clauses, no stipulations, only a single binding promise. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving to you what I told you on that first terrible night, that you deserve better, that you deserve everything. You deserve a partner who will champion your brilliance, a love that is unconditional, and a lifetime of happiness. Jane Miller, my brilliant, resilient, beautiful partner, will you marry me?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. She was laughing and crying at the same time, a beautiful, happy mess. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood up, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with all the passion, respect, and profound love that had grown between them. It was a kiss that sealed their final, permanent merger. They had started as a boss and an assistant, a relationship defined by hierarchy and professional distance. They had navigated betrayal, heartbreak, and doubt. But they had emerged not just as equals, but as two halves of a stronger